Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to another fundraising Friday. Um, we are talking about activating a grassroots board. Um, this blurry picture that I didn't realize was going to be so blurry was actually from the climate protest at Burning Man that just happened a couple of weeks ago. So I thought it was pretty fitting and timely. This is our full progressive multiplier team. Have my colleague Polly, and also I think I saw Valeria in here earlier, but maybe they'll be coming back. But yeah, you'll see, myself, Polly, Valeria, and oftentimes other members of the PM team on these calls. Please feel free to reach out to us if you ever need any assistance. I want to talk about the Fundraising Friday program. And a little bit more about who we are as Progressive Multiplier Fund. Our whole goal is to help organizations build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. Our organization does this through organizing and leveraging funding, creating on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earn revenue programs. And we do this through an online community of practice, which you all are a part of, and our grant making and support program. And our goal is to build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that we can amplify a people-powered movement. And so these are our three main focus areas for our grants: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. And our goal is really to help build the revenue generating capacity of the organizations that we give grants to in these focus areas to help build up their work, because we feel that they are some of the most pivotal focus areas for us to create the systemic change that we really want to see on a national and global level. And this is our most effective path to building sustained progressive power. I wanted to give a shout out again to our amazing partners at Resilience Initiative, who are supporting Fundraising Friday. And if you haven't already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your org, and role. As always with our Fundraising Friday calls, these sessions are recorded and they will be posted on our private YouTube channel, and we can share that link for you. And so things that you would get also through this partnership, that we really, really, really want you to be able to, take full advantage of. One-on-one fundraising coaching. You get up to 5 hours of individual coaching and consulting, and we'll work on creating some deliverables for you as well. There's a list of past projects that we've worked on in the past. We have an incredibly talented, skilled team of fundraisers here. So I don't think that there is pretty much any project that we would say we don't know how to do. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it. And in addition to that, we have these Fundraising Friday sessions that are happening in two tracks: the one-on-one track, which is building on some of the fundamentals of fundraising, and the 201 track, which is looking at more current trends and events. And these topics were driven by y'all. Please feel free to sign up for one-on-one.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. We'll put that link in the chat for you all. I can probably do that right now. And you can reach out to Michelle Mengel at Reliance Initiative, or myself or Polly if you have any questions about that. And I'm going to go grab that link for you all so you have it. That should be to sign up for the one-on-one sessions. And this could take you to our YouTube channel. So beyond this episode of Fundraising Friday, if you have seen a past one or want to look at past ones and share them with folks, or just share them with your team or refresh yourself on what we've talked about, please feel free to go to our YouTube channel. All the videos of all previous sessions for multiple years are on there. So please take advantage of those as well. Great. So as you said before, we're going to be talking about activating and building a grassroots board. So some of the topics that we're going to cover today are what makes a grassroots board different than your traditional nonprofit board, what some of the perks are of creating a grassroots board or having a grassroots organization, some recruitment strategies to like get folks to join that board, and some structures and support that you may want to incorporate into the design and creation of your board. So it operates well for your organization. Then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. Great. So let's talk about what makes grassroots boards different. You can go ahead, Polly.
I'm button happy today. Sorry about that.
You got a lunch appointment or something. It's like, let's get out of here on the dot. um, Great. So let's talk about what grassroots board is and what makes it different than your traditional nonprofit. The grassroots boards often come out of organizations that respond to an immediate community need. So they really form organically out of the communities they serve because the organizations fund are formed pretty organically out of uh, issues that are happening within a community. Whereas more traditional nonprofits may, go straight into like the 501c3 route and getting your paperwork aligned and is on a more rigid and structured process. You may see, a crisis point or an inflection point in a community and people start organizing around it, or people start raising money to do something, some form of mutual aid, etc. And then once you start operating at scale, you're like, oh, well, we should build like an organization around this so it can exist and it can continue to do the work that we started here. So they're often driven by those who are either directly affected by or impacted by or connected to the original root cause of the organization. Traditional nonprofit boards are usually more formally structured, and their purpose is more for resourcing and networking. So the members on those boards are oftentimes specifically solicited to join the board for things that they can offer the organization, whether it be their networks of folks who either have power, influence, or money, their specific skills that they can offer pro bono to the organization so that they don't have to pay for it, or specific expertise. So it's not necessarily that they are particularly impacted by the work or come from the community that the organization is serving, but that they have some skills or things that they can offer the organization that do not currently exist within the staff or volunteer makeup. And so just something to think about is how the composition of grassroots boards make fundraising different than traditional boards. Just to get a sense of the room and what organizations we have in here, I know folks put it up in the chat, but maybe we can do just like a show of hands, maybe if folks know the raise hand feature, who on here is operating in a grassroots organization as compared to a more traditional nonprofit organization. So if you want to raise your hand or throw up an emoji. Yeah, I think you can be a little bit of both. Can you explain a little bit more, Mia, about what you're thinking?
I'm just thinking that our board encompasses some of the aspects of the grassroots board, community board that you described, like, where we're really prioritizing the leadership of people most impacted by the issues we address, and we're really prioritizing like supporting leadership development, and the board is a vehicle for that, and thinking about how we bring new and diverse and young people in particular into board leadership. And we also have folks who are like kind of more traditional board members. And so we're like really looking to find a fundraising model that can really support board engagement for like a range of board members.
Great. I think that's a fabulous point, and something that I think we're seeing a lot more of in recent years is a transition for a lot of organizations to try and make more inclusive boards, or at least have, whether it's an advisory board or a couple of seats on the board that are of people who are directly impacted by the organization's work for a number of reasons. And so that's to increase inclusivity, to get more responsiveness about organizational direction, and how, community members may view your organization. So I think that that's a great point to bring up. Kirsten, our board of directors is a hybrid because we are a reorganized 501c3. Can you explain what you mean by reorganized, please?
I'm trying to unmute because I can't type fast enough. So the museum was a city organization, and it's very small. But what happened is the city was shutting the museum down. And so a group of environmental educators and teachers and local naturalists came together to create an independent 501c3 and work out a deal with the city so that we could steward the collections, but shift to the primary work that the museum had been doing and grow it, which was creating educational equity and access to science and nature education in the hopes of developing a larger community awareness around environmental change. And so as we did that, we kind of stopped having a traditional museum board. Those folks all kind of left and went to another organization. And we really were just like a scrappy group of environmentalists and teachers. And so it kicked the legs out from under the fundraising facet of it. So we're in an interesting situation now where we're evolving as an organization to build that board that has representation from the indigenous community regionally and representation from countywide, like really building a deeper bench. But one of the things that I see is if we have strong committees, we don't need to be as reliant on having that fundraising board in the way that was more traditional for a lot of nonprofits. If we have robust committee work, then we can kind of create that equity and fuller representation of our entire community. So sorry, thank you for coming to my TED Talk today, everyone.
Oh, thank you for that. I think that what you bring up is a really, really important point, and something that, I think that organizations truly struggle with is if you do have a grassroots board or more of a hybrid board, or you're bringing board members on, a lot of our frameworks of understanding of what a board member's responsibilities are for an organization are framed around their ability to give or to get, right? And so in hard dollars and hard data. But, if as we're trying to be more inclusive of who we let onto boards, who gets access to that level of power within organizations, and how we stay true to communities that we serve, we need to think more creatively and inclusively about how we measure board members' impact and their ability to be good stewards of the organization beyond their ability to give, right? So whether that is, Kirsten, to your point, like participating in committees, volunteer opportunities, speaking engagements, whatever the case may be, thinking more inclusively about how to engage your board and to get them excited about being a board member, and also relieve maybe some of that pressure if they are from working class means or do not have large access of wealth or income to be able to give large gifts regularly. So definitely something to think about. And Jenny, I see your point here. Our board is more traditional, but with some grassroots tendencies. Do you want to speak to what some of those tendencies are for your organization, Jenny?
Sure. So my organization is a little bit odd. So we're a public-private partnership, and I actually work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But what my program does is we bring together federal and state agencies and NGOs and academia and all sorts of people to say, how can we work together to address the things that we're all interested in. And I have a board of directors, which is unusual for a federal government agency. And so, a lot of our board members are there because of, their particular area of expertise or because they represent a particular organization or agency. But as we, I guess some of the things that we focus on and some of the the work that particular board members are doing feels a little bit more in that grassroots model, where there are particular issues that are really important to them or to their organization that are also priorities for the larger group, where they get a lot more engaged.
Got you. That makes total sense. So it's like more about, ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, because not necessarily competing interests, but like folks are coming from a bunch of different places, like in engaging with the work.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, great.
I think it's important to always remember that, like, especially for 501c3s, incorporated organizations, the board is part of a corporate structure and therefore has fiduciary responsibilities and can be held legally liable for any lawsuits that might happen, whether it's employment law, which lots of nonprofits wind up having employment lawsuits, or God forbid, some fraud or fiduciary malfeasance. So when you think about if you're thinking about transitioning from a traditional board to a all grassroots, or if you want to stay in a hybrid zone, just sort of remember what that actually can mean for the individuals on your board. And it's really important to sort of think about how do you make space for the people of your community, create these great building opportunities, make sure their voices are heard, but without creating a burden, that an unintentional burden that could possibly befall them. And I'm not suggesting that means you should never, because I've had lots of boards. We had very good governance set up, and we're filled with that were grassroots built. But it is something to really think about, like, what are all the fiduciary responsibilities, what are the needs that you need on those roles that you need filled, to make sure that you're upholding your fiduciary responsibilities organizationally as a board, but still making sure that you prioritize the voices of the people that you need at that table.
I think that's a great point, Polly. Yeah, making sure that there is that balance, and folks know what all their responsibilities are, and how best to uplift the organization wholly. Great. Let's talk a little bit about operations and structure. Because of their more organic nature and growth, grassroots boards tend to have cultures of being more informal or flexible. Board members often shift roles and responsibilities with a more communal idea of power sharing and building. Traditional nonprofits have more established procedural structures that they follow. Rules are more rigid, to change things, either board structure, roles, additions, subtractions, all of those things require specific triggers and measures for those things to happen. See, bravo for good governance. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about it. How do those things make things both easier and harder for grassroots boards, like the structure of the governance? Kirsten, I see that you have a very particular leaning one way on this, but like, if you want to elaborate about why you think one more governance, or I guess good governance is better. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, definitely not more necessarily, but good governance, and I think one of the strongest things you can do is find a model you like, and maybe ask the organization if you can talk to some of their leadership a little bit about it, or even a board member. If you're a grassroots organization, sometimes it's one of the places we can slip into the weeds, or get caught off guard by something we did, as you were mentioning, particularly if you have employees. But good governance, it's like it frees everybody up to do their work. If it's well outlined, and the policies and goals are well defined on paper, and you review it on a regular basis, so you can see if it's still, you know, mission aligned and also meeting the growth of your organization, it can save you a world of heartache. So while it may not be everybody's favorite thing to spend time doing, it's a personal passion of mine, having been at multiple organizations of varying sizes, that like the governance can really free your board and your staff up to do good work, and understand exactly where they need to be on any given day or topic.
Mhm. I think that that's a great point, Kirsten. And one thing that I would like follow up in saying is like just thinking through, you know, you were talking about good governance and things that work best for your organ team, thinking about how power exists within your board and how the structures that you have may like either facilitate or hamper like getting things done, right? So for instance, there are pros and cons to both sides of the argument, right? If you have a board that maybe has more amorphous roles, people can feel free to step in and support where they see there's things lacking, but it also can tend to build a culture of soft power existing, you know, within certain particular members of the board who either have more time or are more activated, et cetera, et cetera. Having more rigid roles can, you know, provide clarity and allow people to focus on what they want to do and what they've signed up for. But, you know, if you have a person holding a role, say like board president, who isn't really doing, you know, what they should, then it becomes a lot harder to like move around them, right? And so you need to like figure out what your structures are that will help uplift what you really want to get done and how you want to operate with your board.
Yeah, I really like the comment also that you just made about don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of really good information that's publicly available about board governance models, mostly because the fiduciary responsibilities of corporations, and nonprofits are corporations, are static. You know, there's the duty of care, loyalty, obedience, and, you know, there's, you know, some folks will throw in two more, but they pretty much all come, you know, boil down to those things, in my opinion. But you know, I have worked, and this is literally not an exaggeration, with well more than 100 organizations, and I have never seen in my career a good board running, overseeing an organization that was bad. If the board is governed well, the organization can do nothing but succeed. I have seen lots of really good organizations with terrible boards, but they're succeeding in spite of, not because of, and then in support of the board. So, you know, I say it again. So you know, I'm passionate about board governance and how you can make you know, a board be not only fulfill its fiduciary responsibilities, but also reflective of your mission, vision, and values, and be a help to the organization. I taught board governance for more than a decade, almost exclusively. So like, you know, I can totally nerd out, and I will try not to overly nerd out on this conversation. But if anybody wants to deep dive on any particular aspect, I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Thanks for that, Paul. Yeah, I think, you know, what you said is very true. Like your board can either be your floor raiser or your ceiling limiter, right? So having good structures, having an effective board will really not only help you programmatically, but especially with fundraising as well. Great. So let's talk about fundraising and how these two boards tend to operate. Grassroots boards traditionally help with more localized forms of fundraising, especially around IRG. And if your organization is highly reliant on IRG, independent revenue generation, you can really utilize your board to expand your organization's reach in these methods. So whether that is getting individual donations from the community, locating small local grants, or doing fundraisers, their support, you know, often helps organizations with leaner budgets, tighter resourcing, and are really supportive to be able to meet demand in closer to real time. Traditional nonprofits, have larger funding pools to pull from, maybe larger in scale. So they're interested in, state-based, regional, national grants, corporate partnerships, larger major donors. So oftentimes board members, it's there about who right? So you'll have your development team that's already handling some of that work, and your board member might be that in for you because they know a person who works at that foundation, or they know someone who works at that corporation and can put in that good word for you. So it would be great to hear from you all. How does your board currently help you fundraise? Do they help you fundraise? And what support, if you could ask for like one thing from your board, as far as it relates to fundraising, like what would that be?
So I don't want to take up more than my share space, but I just want to mention that I think that I love hearing Polly say over and over again, emphasizing the importance of board governance and how different board members reflect on the fiduciary responsibility and the fundraising part, I think is, of course, germane to this conversation. And it's an interesting thing to witness as you move through your career in nonprofit work, is how do different organizations have that conversation with their board members? How do board members show up? And how many board members are just really, invested in the organization and love the work and are completely uncomfortable with that aspect of it and will avoid it like it's a hot rock. And I would love to hear, I feel like it's paramount to board work. I feel like it's on there for a reason. And it's one of those conversations. I'd like to hear how other organizations are talking with their board about the fundraising aspect of fiduciary responsibility and the understanding the ins and outs of how the organization is using resources. Because it's one of those things, to me, it's at the top of that board work pyramid.
100%. I definitely agree that, it is incredibly important, and that board members, by duty, should be highly involved in this. And yeah, I would love to hear more from folks about, what they do currently with their board. If there are some tips and tricks about having that conversation. I can speak to a number of organizations that I've worked with in the past where, having, those difficult conversations about, even establishing a give get or figuring out what, for boards that have multiple types of wealth and income, what fair responsibilities for fundraising look like. And Polly, I know you have a wealth of knowledge in this area as well. So
I'm really trying to bite my tongue so I don't speak too much too. Yeah, so one of the things that I really like to do, and then I'd love other people to jump in on this, but to me, it has to be grounded in the orientation, right? So and not just as a board member, you gotta, we want you to fundraise, but like literally tying it to their actual fiduciary, meaning legal requirement of a board duties. So, and specifically, this relates to the duty of care. As part of your organization's duty of care, a board member is supposed to ensure the appropriate fiscal operation of the organization and make sure that the organization is on financial steady footing. Right? You're supposed to be looking out for the financial well-being of the organization. Now, what boards members, so when we talk about that in board trainings, we often talk about that as it relates to like, that means we have to review our balance sheet and then you guys do an audit. Or some folks don't even realize that the audit is specifically a tool of the board. You might think of it as our, audit, because it is our audit, but like it is literally an oversight tool of the board of directors. They should be heavily involved in the selection and the organizing of the audit process, because that's how they do their oversight. But when we do trainings of boards, we often just focus it on that, financials and audits, right? Every meeting, there's a financial update. that's only balance sheet part of it. Fiduciary responsibility for the financial stability of an organization also means making sure there's enough money coming in. So if you orient your board by saying the definition of your fiduciary responsibility as it relates to our financial stability is making sure you're on top of the financial statements and asking good questions when questions come up every time we review them, making sure that we're actively involved in the auditing process, making sure that we have an active and healthy stream of income coming in, making sure that we are good stewards of those resources when they do come in as they go out. And then you demonstrate, how do you demonstrate good stewardship of funds that we use, and how do you demonstrate that you're ensuring resources are coming in? And that's what opens the door to, hey, we need you to open us up to your networks. Let's do a sphere of influence discussion where you tell us like all the ways that we can use your networks to help us connect to maybe funders or individual donors or corporations, or this is where you then also talk about a give and get policy. But when you tie it directly to their legal responsibility as a member of that board of directors, it then becomes difficult to be like, oh, I just don't do that part. Well, we made it really clear at the beginning when we oriented you about what each part of your fiduciary responsibility means, that it includes this thing. And then you can start to hold then people accountable if you have an accountability structure within your board.
I think that's a great point, Polly. Like, setting the expectations up ahead of time is definitely key in this. So no one can say, well, I didn't know I was supposed to, or you know what I mean? And it helps really frame a culture of accountability, not only, with it feeling like external, like the organization versus the board, but also within the board themselves. Like, they should be taking pride in them holding this form of the work. And there should be board members who, are actively going out and like ensuring that their other board members are doing their part as well. And Polly, I know you have a question in here, so.
So accountability structure, I'll start with that one, and then I'll talk about the orientation and recruitment stuff. So having accountability structure, I think that how many, you throw up emojis, raise your hands, whatever. How many of you have duds on your board and have been like, oh, won't they ever leave? How can we get rid of this freaking dead weight on our board? I bet you everyone has had, if not currently, you've had that experience at some point. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all, for being brave. I know there's liars in here.
Yeah, I'm impressed, y'all, because I never know who's going to be on one of these calls. I'm neither agreeing nor denying.
I am specifically asking about your past.
Oh, okay. Well, in the past, I may or may not have had people who.
Right. So if you set up, when you're doing your board orientation, if you're setting up this is what each fiduciary responsibility means, and this is how we want you to demonstrate that you're participating in your fiduciary responsibilities, then you have a mechanism to be like, you know what? Part of our duty of care, Polly, is that you come prepared to every board meeting. You read the materials in advance. You participate when we're having conversations, when we're deliberating. You actually participate in the deliberation. And I have noticed that you have been quiet and you haven't been prepared. So this would be a responsibility of the board chair, as as the boss of the board, and to say, Polly, we need to talk about your commitment. Are you truly committed to this board? Are you truly, and then, call me in to change. I would also make this part of the board, like rules, so their job description sort of rules. This is what your responsibilities are. And if you don't do them, you'll be held accountable in these ways. And you can have a life, you can be busy and just need to tap out, but you can do it like, hey, I'm going to be transparent here. Got a lot of stuff going on for the next 3 or so board meetings. I'm going to be real low key, but I promise after I get through this period, I'll be right back up again. Always give grace. but it needs to be in a transparent way. So if, if you're calling me in and you're like, hey, Paula, you're not really doing your job here. We need you to step up. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah, I hear you. And then the next meeting, I'm not prepared again. And I don't read the stuff, and I'm bogging down the meeting because I'm asking questions that would have been answered had I read the materials or taking us off topic because I didn't prepare. Then I can bring it back up again, or say, you know what, meeting of the executive committee, we've had a conversation with Polly about her falling down on her duty of care. I think it's becoming a hindrance to board progress. She's been warned. This is our rule. We will ask her to step down, or if not, we will vote to remove her. That is what accountability looks like. Just like you would do with your staff. These are the things, how I hold you accountable. Let me support you in doing better. Let me, tell me what might be going on. So if you need grace, I can give it to you. If you need a timeout and step back from the board, then we'll just know you're on a 3-month sabbatical from the board. Fine, as long as it's transparent. But if somebody's like continually falling down on their duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, then you can say, you are not demonstrating that you're holding up the standards that we require on this board and that we're legally required to have. So, I'm sorry, but we need to ask you to go. Done. Those are hard conversations to have, but they're a lot easier to have if you have the rules written out and a system of accountability. Like, you get to mess up, we can have conversations, but if after we have conversations and you continue to mess up, we'll vote you off. And that way, when you have people, like, you don't have those like random, like ego driven, like people get voted off the board. You have actual reasons that people are voted off the board that are bound to the rules of being a board member. So that's how I would do accountability. I'd love to hear if other groups have actually implemented a system of accountability or know that you have something in place in your organization and whether you actually use it. Lots of folks have it, but don't use it. Whether we have materials that will frame, there's lots out in the space, lots and lots and lots out in the space. We Progressive Multiplier, we really try not to like recreate the wheel when things are out there, so, but if we can also put our heads together and figure out if there's a special tool that we should create from a progressive organization standpoint, which would be different than what's out in the world. So thanks for that sort of cue. But there's a really good the independent sector has this, that it used to be free. You can find older versions that are still roaming around the internet in PDF form, but they have this really incredible governance guide to board membership. And they have one that's like, they have 2 versions, one that's just, regular language, and one that's like legalese with legal citations for the super nerdy ones. And I had that one when I had mine. It's a really useful document because it can really reframe your thinking of the fiduciary responsibilities of a board if you hadn't really thought about it in that way. One of the other things that they did is they interviewed board members, and they have some articles on the independent sector. And one of the ones that I've referenced a lot was a former board chair of the independent sector talking about the difference between oversight and volunteering, and that he understood that when he was in the position of being the board chair, he was the board chair and he had this oversight role. But sometimes he would volunteer for the organization too. And in those moments, he wasn't the board chair. He was, Joe Schmo volunteer, and he took orders from the staff. And that was a really important distinction. And I thought that was a really good conversation and a good also framing for board members to understand that they don't get to boss staff. The only person that they're in charge of is the executive director. And if you're working with staff, you're working with them or for them. So they've got some really good tools there. And if you just Google board, nonprofit board fiduciary responsibilities, there's like a gajillion workshops and materials out there. But let's certainly we can huddle internally and see if there's something that we could or should do in this area.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for that, Paul.
Mm. And Lucy, I would link to the resource, but if I go pull it up, you'll lose the screen and So if somebody else wants to look it up and jump it in there, I would appreciate it. So Mia, I'm sorry, what were you referring to when you said that's not how I would put it? Do you remember?
When you were talking about board members as being dead weight.
Yeah, sorry.
I may have found the PDF that whoa, I'm not sure if I can link to it. It's a big Google link, so maybe that's not going to work, but.
Nope, it works. Thank you.
So, Polly, if I just may, you touched on something that I think is super important to kind of circle back and re-emphasize, which is the umbrella of, or lack of a, maybe not umbrella, but the important facilitation of executive directors and board, how they are communicating desires, how they are communicating requests with staff. Because I think it is one of those things that, in particular for grassroots organizations, like how do we keep that firewall robust to provide the protection from requests or demands of staff time or suggestions with a little bit of a lean, versus also wanting to have that healthy communication interplay between our board and our staff, and that connectivity, so that the board is invested in supporting the staff work without feeling like, and of course I have not had any of these experiences recently, but I'm just saying that you know, that hybrid again, or that grassroots model where you want the integration and the collaborative mindset, but the executive director keeping that healthy separation of church and state, to use a old person's term.
Yeah. You know, while the only person that the board supervises is the executive director, there are absolutely real situations where the board and the staff have to work together, right? You know, two come to mind off the top of my head: the fundraising committee and the finance committee. The fundraising committee is going to work with the development director. The finance committee is going to work with CFO. And I think that what's important in the laying out, this would probably, where I put this stuff is like in the description of the committee's roles and responsibilities. And I would also do like the committee, you know, committee don'ts, committee do's and committee don'ts. Like, yeah, the committee is supposed to get regular financial updates from the finance office. That's just legit a need of the board from an oversight perspective. And as a finance committee, they are the board by proxy. But if it's audit season, the finance director is allowed to like be like, chill. Can you know, like, I can't hop to it at this moment because we're in the middle of audit season, but I promise you, you'll get it. Now, if they keep using excuses as to why they're not sharing information with the board and not with their committee, and that could be a red flag that then goes to the executive director, and the executive director intervenes on behalf of the board from a management perspective. If the finance director is flagging to the executive director, like, hey, the finance committee is like hounding me and I need them to pull back, that's when the executive director intervenes, goes to the board chair and says, hey, issue with the finance committee, need your support, and pulling them back a little bit. And this is why. So it's, you know, there's a need to sort of respect hierarchies there, but also there's going to be cross communication. There just needs, your staff need to be trained well enough to know to feel safe to communicate with you, and to know that they are not led by that board person just because hierarchically, organizationally they're above, but also to respect that that committee has a direct role in that work. It's a little bit of a dance, but you know, it's not just the board that needs training, but it's also staff that needs training. Tons of times in my career, I've said, you know, talk to staff and they've been like, but it was the board. And it's like, well, you know, okay, this tells me now I have to train my staff that just because a board member asks them to do something doesn't mean they stop what they're doing and do it. They still have the priorities. They can ask if they don't know, they be pleasant, they be nice, and they just say, hey, I just need to check on this before I jump to that. So the training needs to often go in both directions.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Polly. And I would say, on top of that, realistically, the role of the executive director should be that membrane between the staff of the organization and the board. That's oftentimes why executive directors have a seat on the board as well. So, things that I've seen organizations do to ensure that the executive director is in spaces to be able to facilitate those conversations and be able to manage up effectively is to have like staff board time. So specific, time slots, like maybe it's once a month or bi-monthly, where like the board can make requests of staff or have that interaction as needed, but it's in a facilitated space so that the ED knows what conversations are being had and is able to, interject if there are, unreasonable requests or context that needs to be given to like what to prioritize and how to prioritize. Basically, like you just don't want to be having those conversations happening without your knowledge or your awareness of what's happening. Because then you're going to lose your ability to both manage down towards your organization, but also to manage up towards the board and their expectations. So like, whoever sits in that role, and if you're in the finance side or the development side, you can have the same, type of relationship with the board, just specifically around your department and those types of needs. So really being able to and willing to manage that relationship and be that liaison between the two, I think is the best way to ensure, you can stay on track and you don't get bogged down with requests that don't, necessarily benefit your workflow and what your org and team needs to be doing at that time.
Shall we jump to the next slide, or do folks want to have anything else on this? And we can always come back if at the end we have more time, we certainly can come back.
We're good to go. Right. So let's talk about decision-making, duration, and commitment. So grassroots boards, as we talked about, are operating in more collaborative ways and power is shared. Board members may also just be more transient in a grassroots organization because the roles haven't been as hardly defined. Their responsibilities haven't been as hardly defined. And oftentimes, if you are a working class person or do not have access to wealth, like spending labor on the board is more difficult for you. So you tend to see folks who have, life situations come up that really affect their capacity and ability to be members of the board. So things that you might want to do to be creative to ensure that might be create advisory positions where folks can, still be engaged but not be an active voting member of the board, figuring out different structures for board times to meet, things of that nature. Your traditional nonprofit boards are going to have more of that hierarchy. They're going to be outlined in the bylaws, and these processes are going to be super formalized, and members will have set terms of, you're a board member for 3 years or 4 years or whatever the case may be. And there are those deeper expectations about what that role and that commitment to being a board member is than exists in a smaller organization. I want to make sure that we have time because I know we had a lot of questions, so we might zoom through a little bit of the information, but feel free to pause us as we need to. But definitely want to encourage some more of the great conversation we've been having. So let's talk about what some of the perks are and benefits to having a grassroots board. The first thing, and something that we've highlighted before, number one is community representation. Being made up of members of the community ensures that the board can be in touch with local issues, needs, sentiments, and the way that the board or the organization relates to your community can be uplifted and held. That flexibility can also be a plus as well. because folks can jump in as needed. You'll be more collaborative, and decisions can be made a lot faster. You know, you don't necessarily have to wait for quorum or things like that, to be able to move on things that you need to. You can also have more authentic engagement with the community as well, because oftentimes folks are going to be either directly impacted or members of the community themselves. If they have public speaking arrangements, they can represent the organization in a much more authentic way, you know, than maybe your traditional board member who is only recruited for their fundraising capabilities. Another thing is cost efficiency. You know, if you're running a smaller or leaner organization, you can lean on your board for, you know, their skill set to be able to help support some of the work that you're doing. And I think that this is also a great way. This combined with volunteerism is a great way for folks who are not necessarily, you know, of wealth to give to the organization to be able to support the org and work. Things that I've seen that are really creative are, you know, for instance, if somebody, you know, is on the board and they don't have the ability to give, but they have the ability to give their time, looking up what the hourly rate is for like the role if you were to hire somebody internally and giving them essentially that credit. So if, you know, the role was like $50 an hour, if you were hiring on the open market to, like, say, do some development work and the board member did that for you, they would essentially get, as far as your organization is concerned internally, like for the board get $500 of in-kind donation of their time and labor. And so that's a great way to keep folks engaged and to also let folks know that you value their time, you know, especially if they, you know, don't have the money to give. Another thing is, you know, because you're growing organically, oftentimes your board members will be highly plugged into the community that you serve, and they should be your beacons and be able to spread through word of mouth, through social connections, social media, everything that the organization is doing. So board members for grassroots organizations can be really great organizing members as well. And that's something that I think a lot of orgs don't rely on their board members enough to do. Anything on either of those points, Polly, that you?
No, I think those are good points, and we can definitely go deeper in the roundtable at the end.
Right. Deeper resilience. Having those community ties is going to help your organization through tough times that you potentially are going through. Direct feedback loops, because your board members are going to be plugged into the organization. You can bounce ideas off of them in a tighter and more timely fashion to get community voice, you know, heard and seen within the organization. And it's also very empowering for members to become part of the organization as a whole and really build in stronger community ties. And correct, Mia, yes, you can, it wouldn't be a tax donation, but if you wanted to, you could do an in-kind donation of support. And so they would be able to get an in-kind donation letter. Great. So let's talk about how you want to build and find these proper board members to help support your org and the work that you want to do. First is power mapping your community through identifying stakeholders, figuring out who the
Oh, sorry.
no worries. Figuring out who the major folks are around your focus and issue area and how they could be useful to your organization as a board member across a myriad of you know, factors. Then you want to get into thinking through your recruitment strategy, ensuring that your board is diverse, that it reflects community perspectives, and that you're being able to gather community voice also from different areas and through different lenses as well. One thing that we talked about before was setting up like the frameworks and systems to be able to set clear objectives and roles for each board member so they know what their responsibilities are before they join the board, and ensuring that, you know, as they're on the board, they're getting the support and help that they need to like ensure that they understand what's expected of them and how best to support them through that. So we really want to make sure that we're designing and building these systems before mass recruitment, so that you don't end up in a situation where you know, folks feel slighted because you're expecting something of them that, you know, maybe was misunderstood or miscommunicated. And then a great way to do that is to also just go to peer organization events, find folks, network and do outreach, also collaborate with other organizations in your community that are focused on similar tangential work, and ask them for suggestions if folks would be great fits for your board. You can also utilize social media and local media to reach out to folks, hosting an info session or community engagement session to introduce your org to the community in different spaces, and figure out who is very excited and activated to join the board is a great way to do that, as well as having a simple but standard application process. So being able to have, you know, some form of rubric or something to look back on, so that if potentially you have one seat open with 2 candidates, you have some sort of framing to be able to look at, you know, the finer details of, you know, who might be a better fit, rather than just going off of feeling or implicit or explicit bias against or towards someone. Great. So then after that, you want to do your screening and interview process. Make sure you try and get some references. And this is where your work really like continues. You want to welcome them into the organization and maybe pair them with a mentor on the board to ensure that they understand the organizational culture, and also have it some form of orientation where, again, we're going over those roles and expectations. So folks know, you know, if they need to fundraise, how that looks like for your organization, different ways that they can do it, get set up with templates and supplies so they're feeling empowered to be able to do that work themselves. And then you always want to keep your channels open as well. Even if your board is full, you know, you got to follow your ABCs, always be recruiting. So make sure you have a list of recruits, people who are coming up in the community, who you are potentially excited about, either peers or colleagues, and ensure that you're developing a succession plan so that in case something bad happens, you need to let go of a board member, you need to rearrange the board, you have folks in mind, and warm prospects. Great. Now let's talk about structure and support, and what these members need to succeed. Great. So again, orientation sessions from the moment they get onboarded of what their roles are, org history, mission, expectations around fundraising, and regular training around this. You know, for a lot of board members, a lot of organizations only reach out to their board to fundraise maybe one time a year, usually around the end of the year. So oftentimes it becomes just an arduous process for them, or something they don't think about throughout the rest of the year. So being able to support their fundraising arm or creativity around that throughout the year is something that's really important. Effective communication, as we talked about before, creating channels for communication between the organization and the board, but ensuring that you, whether it's yourself as a development person with your development team, or if you're an executive director with your organization as a whole, that you are the filter for that information, both up and down. And so you're able to, you know, manage expectations on both sides and ensure that people are getting what they need. And along with that, you know, even though one of the perks of having a grassroots board is the flexibility of it, folks need clarity about like who's doing what. And even if it's just project management, being able to have those systems set up so that people feel empowered to do their work, but also fill in where necessary and needed. Great. One thing that is huge And something that like I would love to hear from other groups, because I'm always fascinated about this, is decision-making processes. Um, you have to have one, but how groups get around that, whether it's 100% consensus, 50%, what veto power looks like, you have to develop some sort of that structure and framework for your organization and figuring out how that works for you. Figuring out a conflict policy for your board is of the utmost importance, because they're not employees, even though they can make your organization fiscally or legally liable for things. So if there's anything that happens with a board member, there has to be some form of escalation and or processing incidents that, you know, protects and safeguards the organization and the rest of the board members as well. And then one thing too is like to cultivate patience. Organizations, especially grassroots organizations, are working on systemic change things, whether it's trying to get a bill passed or trying to get some sort of social policy moved, that takes years. So helping board members understand what growth looks like for your organization, beyond just the metrics of, oh, well, we have this big of a base now, or we spoke to X many people, is a great way to, you know, temper expectations and make sure that folks understand what being on the board is about and what the org is doing. And then transparency and accountability. Polly talked about this before, when it comes to like the fiduciary responsibility of sharing financial information. But we want to make sure that any information is shared, either to the board, but also through the board, potentially to the community, to help build in community trust as well. And that the board should be guiding also the North Star of the organization. So engaging in periodic strategic planning sessions with the executive director, with your leadership team, to help support your org through whatever your 3 to 5 year plan is going forward. Great. So I wanted to leave a lot of time to talk specifically around, you know, the fundraising aspect of this, and how best to support orgs that are trying to get their boards to be either better fundraising boards or just more engaged. One thing that we talked about before was, you know, creating different structures to help folks who, you know, do not have money to be able to contribute to the board responsibilities as far as fundraising. But some things that I would also highlight are creating systems for your board members to be able to plug and play as easy as possible. Oftentimes, if they don't have experience doing fundraising, walking through asks with them, and being there, helping them see what the process looks like, and doing some trainings around that. And I think another thing is, you know, making it incredibly clear about what their contributions to the organization are, and ensuring that they understand the importance of the work, and that, you know, the org really can't exist without them doing this supportive work. You know, making that place super clear to them, so there's no way for them to feel comfortable about skirting their duties, and about, you know, because asking and doing fundraising, especially from their friend groups, which is something that I've seen in the past before, is like a difficult barrier for people of wealth and not of wealth. You know, those are definitely things that, like, I think that we can, you know, create structures and support for board members around, and really train them up so they feel more comfortable, but also understand the importance of doing that. Polly, do you have things that you would add as like key takeaways for the fundraising section? Because I know that we spent a lot of time on that, and I want to make sure that we have more time to answer some questions.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, one of the things that I've really tried to do that I think helps with the fundraising thing is to like routinize it early on, just like I mentioned with the training in the beginning when you train your board members about like fiduciary responsibilities. I also build in the, not just like, let's, you know, there's a give get policy, but like routinize the implementation of what that looks like. So one of the things that I've used a lot is I create like a, you know how like every year you have to have your board sign the Sarbanes-Oxley thing about self-dealing and all of that stuff, right? I actually create an additional document that is like a board commitment document where it's like, has the board member's name at the top, and it's like with the date, and it's like, as a member of this board, I commit to, and it lists, the basic fiduciary responsibilities, acting in the best interest of the organization and following my, duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. I will come to the board meetings prepared and blah, blah, blah. I will support the financial stability organization by, advocating for good stewardship of resources, and also providing resources, providing and access to resources, right? And then in that section, there'd be like a link to document, or there'd be like a fill in the blank, and I will do that in these ways. And so it could be, there might be some ideas like, I will host a house party and invite 10 people, and my goal for my house party is this amount of money, and like have them say that up front. Also on that document would be like, my personal financial commitment is. And if you have a give get policy, it doesn't have to be like a dollar, doesn't have to be like dollar bound for everybody. It doesn't have to be like everybody has to do 5,000, because you might have somebody on your board who could do like raise a whole lot more than 5,000. And you might have somebody else on your board who, it would be awesome if they brought in 250, so the give get policy can be a conversation, like in the beginning when you're doing that discussion and that person's like accepting the responsibility of joining the board, say, okay, we have a give get policy. Let's talk about what you're making your give get commitment is. And hopefully they will do both. It's not a give or. So it's like, tell me what your financial commitment is. Maybe my financial commitment is $5 a month. Maybe that's a stretch gift for me. But maybe it's not, maybe I can do more. But my get is this. I'm going to do a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign on Giving Tuesday. I'm going to do a house party. I'm going to host a happy hour at my favorite bar and invite all of my friends, and then pass a hat, or and really encourage like whatever is the thing that is the right thing for that person. Like if somebody is not a house party person, and like, they're stale dried toast and couldn't entertain a sock, like don't do a house party. Maybe they should be doing something. Maybe they're like phenomenal writers. Maybe they are fun. Maybe they are on another organization, lead another organization, so they have access to funders and could do introductions. But I try to make my fundraising asks specific and concrete, and set it up at the beginning, and then use that as part of the accountability structure. Like, all right, Polly, you committed to do these things. We're 6 months into the board, the year of your commitment letter. How are you, like, I haven't seen you host that house party that you promised to do, or, like, it just gives you something to follow up on. It gives the development person, if you are lucky enough to have a development staff, the ability to follow up and create those relationships. So that's how I try to do it. I try to concretize it in the beginning, make it very specific to that individual, especially in a grassroots board situation. And don't make it as soon as you make it a side thing, like these are your board responsibilities, and then, oh yeah, next conversation a week or a month or 3 months later, this is your fundraising thing. It's not going to feel like it's really a responsibility. Jennifer, you want to talk about your comment?
I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, you re-muted.
Sorry.
There we go. No worries.
We have two people hosting for us, and one board member has hosted before, and then she was like, but don't ask anyone for money. And then another one is very much like, okay, what should we expect? And so I guess I'm curious, I'd like to be able to like put it right on the invitation. You had kind of mentioned it, Polly, like our goal is to raise $20,000 at this event. For this dinner, she's hosting it again, the second year. And so I'm inviting everyone who actually gave after the first one, even though they were never asked. There was a handful. And then I'm including my top prospects. But I'd love to like hear from people. Like I'm about to draft the invite today, actually. So I'd love to know kind of how do you put that on the invitation? And there's going to be people there who could do $100,000. But we also don't want to feel like we're excluding people for whom like this could be a good stewardship or a good, introduction to the organization. So love any thoughts or feedback on kind of, I've thought about like maybe putting, suggested donation on there or I don't know. I just would love to hear other people's thoughts on how you would do that on an invite.
I would bet $20 whole that everybody who's invited to that event expects it to be a fundraising event, whether it's said or not. So whether the person is like, no, don't ask. There's going to be an ask. There's got to be an ask. Whether, if you want to make it explicit on the invitation, I'm not a fan of like the suggested donation thing, unless it's like, I don't know, people feel free to contradict me. Just because I'm not a fan doesn't mean it doesn't work. But like if it's like a happy hour or something that is typically like a fun thing and maybe not, or like something that feels like an outreachy type of a thing, and I want to make it clear, then I'll do it in that respect. Or like, if it's like a film showing and we're doing it for free, but we really could use it to be paid for, I might do, I've done that a lot of times too. But when it's like a dinner type of a thing, I'm really, I think it's understood the people who tend to be invited to and come to those. I've done things that said like, we will be soliciting at the event, or yeah. It's indelicate, but I've done one of the things that I've done is I've worked with the host to make sure that the host list are people who are aligned, are philanthropic. I don't care how much they care about you. If they're not somebody who likes to give or is philanthropically inclined, that's a little bit of a waste of a seat. So they're aligned, they're philanthropically oriented, they would be motivated by the things that you do. Like those are the things. And then I would try to set a target goal for each one of those people. And just like, it doesn't matter. Like, don't even make it an option for the person hosting. Like, no, this isn't, let's talk about your list and let's see how much we can raise from each one. Oh, I don't want you to ask. Well, that's why we're doing this. So let's just talk about each one of your friends and let's talk about what is an appropriate goal. If they keep pushing back, then that's a different conversation I think to have. But so appropriate follow-up helps in those situations. One, like I'm assuming that at that event, that host isn't doing all the talking, right? Somebody else is that's that person's job to do the ask. So take it out of the host's hand. That makes it easier too. But appropriate follow-up, not only follow up to the people who attended, but the follow up to the people who couldn't. And the people who couldn't maybe get a different email with information about the organization, why we're awesome, and a solicitation. Appropriate follow-up to the people who attended. Thank you. Awesome. Here's more information. We're so awesome. Please give. And the people who did give a gushy, glowy thanks, and maybe referencing some of the discussion points that happened at the event. Other people have thoughts? Go ahead, Maya.
Yeah.
Oh, it's me. I just wanted to
Sorry.
jump. One thing that we have done is more engagement events, especially if it's something where, people are hosting it and saying, come and hear about this fantastic organization that's doing such important work. And, and if we're not like worried about the cost of the event, and we're really like excited to connect and network and build community, then, we'll go and share our work. And then and talk with the host about essentially doing a pitch, like saying, I'm going to share with you why I was so excited to bring you all to hear about this organization. This is why I love them. This is why I think the work is so important right now when I am looking at our country crumbling, and like scared. This totally makes me get up in the morning. And if you want to know about more, here is like the fantastic staff, like they will talk with you, and it's not like it's not a get out your checkbook right now, but it can be much more powerful, because if you have people in the room that you think could actually give bigger gifts and over time, then you don't actually just want them to pay you for the dinner or the wine or whatever. You want to develop a relationship and get them excited about your organization. And so like getting their contact information, even if you don't get their contact information, following up with them after the event, being like, hey, I saw you came. Do you want to talk more about it? And you'll know like from the host what their capacity is and how philanthropic that is. And, like if you can, like if it makes sense to really put in the time in that way, or like what kind of time you want to put in. But I think that can be really effective. And if you have a host who's really like, I don't want you to do a hard ask, then don't do a hard ask, but you can still do an ask.
100%. Kirsten's point, I was gonna say something similar. Things that I've seen are definitely the dinner in support of your organization's name, or please join us for a fundraising dinner for, right? So you can make it like tasteful, but that, it's very explicit that this is, a specific fundraising ask. And the reason why you're invited is to raise money. The tricky thing about the suggested plate amount is you don't want to short sell yourself if you have like particular folks in the room. But I think making it known that it's for a fundraising purpose, but not giving it, a specific limitation on like what the donation itself could be is a good middle ground of, keeping it tasteful, and being able to engage in that space.
And whenever I do a ticketed event, I still do an ask. It's still, the people understand the ticket is for the benefit that they're getting that evening. And so I don't really think that folks are going to be like, pearl clutching it at that. Yeah, always ask. Mia, the thing that you said about like talking to folks about their guest list, I'd love to hear your perspective, but my experience has always been that my hosts always underestimate the capacity of the people on their list. And I usually encourage them to be like, oh, you think Polly can do 250? All right, let's ask her for 500. And then, like really encourage, and say, because you can always, fall back to, but what if we get the 500? Do you have any experience with that with your folks?
Definitely. And we actually also use donor search to do, to support prospect research. And so I think just so we have more information and we're really gauging our asks appropriately, and we know like what else they support. It's good to just know who's in the room. And like I was on the board of another organization, and they were doing like a launch event, and there was an ask, and somebody gave $25 at that event. And then, that organization was just fantastic with follow-up and like really genuine. And like, I would love to hear, and didn't know that these people had capacity, but just were like, I'd love to hear, what you thought about our work. And it turned out that it was like a fantastic connection and just a really like wonderful resource for them. So it's possible.
Do other folks have experience in this?
Just to like add on to, I think kind of what has already been said, in my experience, that if you give people, if you set a lower fundraising, like people rise to the expectations that you give them. And if you say my goal is to raise $1,000, then you'll raise $1,000, but those same donors maybe could have helped you raise $50,000 if you would have shared those bigger expectations. And that's kind of also the reason that I don't like to say like suggested donation $25. Just because you're kind of setting artificial limits on things. I will say, like, as somebody on the other end, sometimes like I really appreciate the gratitude from organizations when they reach out to me after I make a donation, but sometimes it feels a little bit over the top. Like where I've given like $10 or $15 and I get a call from somebody on the board of directors thanking me, and it almost feels like the hassle. Like, I don't know you, I don't really want to talk to you, I just wanted to give something good to the work that you're doing. So there's like a balance there, I would say, to be aware of.
I think that's very true. Part of that is to being able to segment your list properly, and deem, who are your major donors, and so who would like necessarily get those touches. Whereas, I think you should communicate with all donors, but maybe not a call from the board chair for like a $5 donation, right? You could send the newsletter, you can add them to the e-blast, maybe put them in your welcome funnel, so they're getting information, and hopefully you want to talk them over time into giving more. But like, yeah, you don't want to jump in too hot off the bat. I think that's a great point.
I love the donor dossier idea too, Kirsten. So thanks for dropping that in that. 100%, Mia, 100%. Any last things? Last questions? Last comments?
I just wanted to add, I was like hearing the people who do this every day, and all, seeing the resources and the tools that you've shared. It's really interesting, really inspiring, gives me lots of thoughts for things that I want to implement. And it strikes me that a lot of this is like, it's like anything, like it seems really hard or it's really uncomfortable to do it at first. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And asking for money, like if that's what you do, if what you're trying to do is raise funds to support your work, you're not going to trick people into giving you money. So like hiding the ask is not useful for anybody. And like what Mia said, like put it out there. This is what we're trying to do. We need your help to do it. That's the path to success, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know if you feel this way completely, but I know like 3+ decades I've been doing this and I still get nervous asking sometimes. Like it's, it doesn't matter how many times you've done it. It's sometimes just hard, and just knowing that that's a reality just might make it a little easier to be like, okay, well, somebody's done it for 3 decades and they get nervous. It's okay if I get nervous too.
100%. I don't think you ever just get comfortable with asking. It's more of an acceptance of like that you may be rejected, is I think the best that you're ever gonna feel about it. But it's part of the game. That's our job. That's why we get paid. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for the great conversation and participation. This has been an awesome session to be a part of. Please join us for our next one, which is donor offerings in the digital age and measuring impact. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great couple weeks until we see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.